Out of all the years in the 2020s, 2025 might be one of the most perplexing years on the label. So many artists started evolving their style into something completely different from their usual work. For the first time in a long time, there were crossover artists between all three sublabels. Months that are typically good for the label turned abysmal, and months that you expect to be bad like August or February managed to make some of the best material this entire year. And the big elephant in the room was Mike Darlington's decision to sell Monstercat to Create Music Group, which means that Monstercat's transition into the mainstream was finally complete, for better or for worse. This decision ultimately had an effect on the type of releases we were going to get, and while there were attempts to bring some of that older Monstercat sound to the table, most of it was either continuations of the Brittum influx, the new freeform bass influx, as if the label's worst and best wasn't polarizing enough, and the trap influx. In other words, if 2023 I felt indifferent and in 2024 I felt more divided, 2025 was a year I disliked. I would even go so far as to say that it was a bad year for the label. The only sublabel that I argue had a decent year was Instinct. Sure, it had more low points than in 2024, and some of the commercialization got to the label also ended on a really bad note. But with the variety combined with the mostly consistent nature of the label, it was a sublabel I was often clinging to for quality and memorable tracks. The rest? Ooh dear. Silk had his worst year since his merge with Monstercat, replicating 2023 Instinct and retreating to a comfort zone of melodic and chill house songs that sound identical with one another. There's little variety on the label, and unlike 2024, Nigel Good and BT were both absent. And then there's Uncaged. And outside of some exceptions and a few bro-up cuts from Virtual Riot or Viperactive, it was either Brittum that sounds like a Disciple reject, freeform bass that feels to be menacing or hard-hitting, average drum and bass tracks that got stale fast, or average trap songs that blend together and also got stale fast. As a result, what you get is a best list that's the weakest I've covered so far, and a worst list that isn't getting worse, but is also not getting much better. And with that, the rules for this list. No remixes or VIPs, sequel songs and vocal edits can count, but that's about it. And only 2 songs per artist in the top 10, along with a new rule. Ever since the Brittum influx, I've been keeping this as more of a relaxed rule in 2023 and 2024, but after this year, it doesn't seem to be stopping, and to avoid retreating to these songs as easy targets, I've made this an official rule. Each Brittum act only gets 1 track. This also includes honorable mentions. Once a Brittum act shows up, that's the only time they'll show up on this list. So if you want to know why, all of this isn't showing up despite being legitimate contenders for this list, that's why. Safe to say I had to cut out a lot, and most of these would have made the list proper if I didn't. So with that said, let's start with the list of dishonorable mentions in no specific order.
This might be the night of your life. Welcome to the light show. This might be the night of your life.
Look, I don't hate Thirst. I know it sounds like I do, given this is the 3rd time they've been on the dishonorable mentions, but after 2024, when I listened to much worse funk as well as Thirst's own material, they're one of the better acts, mostly because of their ability to combine funk with different genres. Take a look at Our Stars or AF1. And their After Hours mixtape has some great songs that capture the vibe better than the vast majority of funk material, like Duality, Feel It, and Yellow Tree. And I'd much rather listen to them than go to NCS to see what nightmares await. Good luck, Iceberg. That said, unlike Get in the Car or Bounce, which are mostly bland bad, this is a unique kind of bad, where the whole song is an underdeveloped mid-tempo track with no punch or groove, and has the monotone vocal sample repeating the phrase, "Welcome to the light show, this might be the night for life," over and over again. Despite the track being only 2 minutes and 25 seconds, it feels much longer given how sluggish and repetitive it gets. Just no.
Let's go disco dancing.
One of my more embarrassing moments from my older ranking videos, outside of the Titans video, is being way too forgiving towards Modern Vice tone. And because of Rule 3, they don't have a shield of awful Brittum songs to avoid the list this year, because that was the only reason why Honey Water missed the list last year. So we have Disco Kissing. A song that's main appeal is a guitar line that sounds washed out, lacking in any muscle or energy. Morgan sounding disinterested, which is the last thing you want in an upbeat party song like this. And a drop that sounds completely empty, since there's nothing new besides an underwhelming tropical lead and a snap with no presence. People have dubbed Vice Tone generic when they're covered nowadays. For me, generic was never the word to describe this. I would instead describe it as underwhelming and dated. For the former, there's no sense of groove for this supposedly being an upbeat party song, and for the latter, this sounds like something from the 028 compilation album, which is almost a decade old. Somehow Tom Ferry's When I'm Gone does a much better job at Vice Tone's aesthetic than Vice Tone does. And that song isn't even that good. I'm cutting the tension with a knife and I'm walking out and kissing nobody. Oh joy, two names. One's an artist I fell in love with after 2024's Is This Real, and the other is a chess player turned DJ whose materials left me unimpressed. Especially when during her episode of Call of the Wild, she teased yet another awful EDM cover of Zombie by the Cranberries. Yeah, we did not need that. And what do you know, the song we end up getting isn't good. Much like funk, techno is built for a specific niche, and only becomes interesting when you combine it with other genres like drum and bass. This isn't combining any genres together, nor is it filling the niche of something in the club. The production is rather tame for techno standards. Like the analog synths, the horn melodies sound like something for a house song, not techno. And that's before I tell you that's the only semblance of a melody here. The techno part just sounds out of place with this long drawn out kick being the only semblance of impact. And just like Taking Me to Space from a few years ago, it seems like adding stuff just for the sake of it to act like it's more grand than it is. And that's before you get Whipped Cream's auto-tuned cooing, which still sounds bad all over the drop. For Whipped Cream, it's a reminder why I lost interest in her current sound, and for Andre Potez, a reminder that her best songs I've heard from her is a song on Instinct that was produced by Punctual and a collaboration with Nailik of all people. And even then it's not that good. Speaking of which... because if Alan Walker wasn't going to release a song on the label this year, I guess Monstercat will give us the best alternative in the form of Nailik's style of hardcore music, which falls into a territory of dated NCS music that should have been left behind in 2015, and even by those standards it should have been left buried. You'd think for a UK hardcore track, there would be more punch, anthemic energy, and a grandiose feeling, kind of like what Darren Styles and Stonebeck did several years ago. Instead we get this, which contains a drop that has an uninspired melody, a random clap thrown in that fits with nothing, a kick that's somehow less impactful than Erased, Sarah DeWarnon phoning in a vocal performance, and a Halloween aesthetic filled with fake violins, and music boxes that somehow cheapens the whole song. It sounds like a bad Poppy Playtime fan song, because it wasn't enough that Chapter 4 was a buggy, frustrating mess. The only thing keeping this from the list is VIP, which honestly should have been the original, because the hardcore elements are more impactful and the techno drop is decent. That doesn't stop the original from being as bad as it is though. Next. There's generic trap, there's awful trap, and then there's John Casey's Happy to Be Here. To put into perspective how bad this EP is, Don't You is the only decent song. Waiting Room is one of the better cuts despite it not being all that good, and despite Ahura with Troy Boy being a contender for the dishonorable mentions, that's the milquetoast cut. John Casey has always been hit or miss, and while he has the potential to make hits, Happy to Be Here was a massive miss. He's going to show up more than once on this list since he's a trap act and not a Brenham act, and we're starting with this. Which, to be fair, the drops aren't terrible. The first one being a trap drop with tribal elements, the other being decent ballet funk. It's just a shame that all the horrible stuff you have to sit through in order to get them, namely the annoying walk sound all over this track that's only prominent element of the pre-drops. The rest is this horn instrument in the back that just sounds as bad, and a vocal sample that sounds like Mr. Lunt from VeggieTales We Had a Cold. And that's before you translate the lyrics to figure out what he's saying. We just hear him bragging about how his gang is awesome and contains the line, and I quote, "When you shake your big ass, I'll tease you with my heart on." And no, this is not the last time we will get a lyric like that on this list. If you're familiar with this EP, you'll know what's coming.
Between my head
I didn't feel like putting an Eater song on this list. Genesis felt less bad and more not my thing. And of all the freeform bass acts on this label, Eater's style is definitely distinctive, relying more on atmospherics, spoken word passages, and an alien-like sound design. I find it more experimental and thus I'm more forgiving of it. It's the same reason why Creation of Disgust by Avance and Quiet missed my list last year. Now Ritual, on the other hand, did have a shot on this list, because it sounded flat and awkward even for his standards. When composing this in November, it was going to be for this slot, then came along Caught Between, a song that was accidentally leaked on Spotify during Quix's meme release Curry Goat, and that story is better than the actual song itself, which starts out nicely with the bright piano keys and Ellipse's good vocal performance, and I even like the cover art reference to half a brain and half a heart that mimics the lyrics. And then the song turns into a badly crafted bro step drop from 2014, with a synth growl shoved so close to the front that not only makes it sound thin, it's also grating to listen to. And worst of all, that's the only thing noticeable, because the second drop is a melodic bass drop that feels more like an outro, with the wavy synths having nowhere near the energy to create a lasting impact. I've heard some of Quix's early material back in the day with his remix of Creep on Me, wasn't impressed back then, and after listening to this, that opinion has not changed. Oh, I remember this one vividly. Even despite a much worse single that came just a day before this dropped, if you know, you know, this was bad enough to stand on its own, as this was one of the few duds on Instinct where Exod tried to make a sequel to Royalty and failed badly. I don't even like Royalty that much, and yet I easily take that song over this, which sounds okay to start thanks to Maestro Chives' violin work, and even if Iki's vocals aren't super impressive, she sounds fun enough here. The build-up had me convinced this would lean more towards festival progressive house. Instead, Exod had the baffling idea to make the drop side trance. Yes, side trance, which fits well with the strings as well as Water and Oil. And you notice it immediately, because while the side trance beat is going on, the violin section gets more staccato and goes into an entirely separate rhythm from the beat. Probably why the beat gets pushed back so far in the mix. I have mixed feeling over Exod overall, and while he's made some good songs like Not Alone or Shangri-La and showcases his production quality, I'll probably say I'm more invested in Exod now than I was at the start of this year. It doesn't stop Follow from being a messy listen all around. I don't even know where to start with this, because sure, there are worse sounding songs on the label that could have taken this slot, but none of that measures up to the sheer disappointment of Moments in Everglow, which was Cohen retreating to a comfort zone of drum and bass songs with identical sound design, and the grit that made some of Cohen's best material significantly getting reduced down. I call it a burnout phase for a reason. When the production's the same, the content is the same, and the vocals are the same, you get burned out of the sound. It's very telling when Steve Aoki, of all people, brings the most variety out of the album, with this track being the worst off that album. A beat cut from the double release of Where My Heart Is, and it sounds exactly like a beat cut, with a weak lead, a beyond standard drum and bass percussion, a lack of body, and a fuzzy distorted texture seriously hurting the song more than helping it. And all of it to back up yet another preachy coming together anthem all about time's on our side and we have to take this moment, as if we haven't heard this content on or off the album. I didn't like it when Lions did it, or Change from last year. And I don't like it here either. I know people might consider this position harsh given the Brittum influx, as well as plenty of people who don't mind this. And you know what, that is fair, but when you get this formulaic and the music starts to lose factors that made these artists who they are, yeah, safe to say, Coven's time is up. But now onto a list proper, starting with number 10. I might surprise some of you by putting this song so low on this list. It seems like everyone has picked this song apart and considers it to be one of the worst songs on the label. Now this isn't low on the list just because I'm trying to be the contrarian of the group, but because there's way more elements to like than most people will give credit. And I actually think the idea for this song isn't bad, and in better hands, this could have been a decent meme song. But since it's not, and the obvious bad parts are still here, it's not escaping my list either. In other words,
I'm feeling wonky.
Now let me be clear here. If it was for Rule 3, Bass Bop would not only replace this, but have a higher shot on this list. I consider that song to be the worst version of this song in terms of production and humor, because yeah, there's a funny concept that actually works for this song. All about two guys taking LSD, going on a trip, where the other one asks how the other one is doing, before saying how they're wonky. And the delivery of the lines is actually decent, kinda reminds me of something from Rick and Morty. The production to start isn't terrible either, with the vocal chops having some personality. But all of that doesn't matter when the drops are as bad as they are. The flow is simplistic, the pacing is too slow at 128 BPM, and the sounds used are not pleasing or impactful. I mean, I like the chain rattle and the bombastic gurgle, but that's about it. The sustains are incredibly annoying on the first drop, and the second drop sounds like Kayako from The Grudge trying to do ASMR. And it's as unpleasant as it sounds. Usually the empty feeling of the track wouldn't be such an issue since it's freeform bass, that's the point. But between the unpleasant sounds and sluggish pacing, you can really feel the emptiness and lack of body in this track in particular. And as a result, it's a bad introduction to a he, and it's yet another dud out of too many from Odd Kid Out. Frankly, the reason he missed the list last year with Feel Again is because I forgot about that song when I made the list. Let's just move on. Number 9. But since we're on the subject of annoying vocals and empty tracks, I mean, I told you guys he'd show up on the list more than once, but did it really have to be this? The year I finished my first throwback Monstercat videos, where the worst list features by Woodstunna, is the moment when John Casey decides to bring back that badly aged style of trap for some reason. There's a good reason why this style of trap isn't being made anymore, and that's because the whole gimmick of this trap with the beat drops got gradually replaced by future bass, and was able to take the gimmick and add a body and presence that this kind of trap couldn't do. Not to say that you can't make it work, but you need to have the little elements you have sound appealing. It's why Turn On For What and Get Low are liked. And this is not it at all. Not only this is trap at its most bare bones, but the little elements we get are incredibly annoying. Points for at least switching up the percussion a little bit, but that can't fix the obnoxious siren that doesn't evolve outside of shifting pitch, the most annoying vocal sample of what the fuck I've ever seen, and paid in full repeating the phrase quake until the end of time. Despite them being featured on here, they add so little to the track outside of the most bare bone verse. They feel like a non-presence here. It's a little lower on the list because I can see the appeal, but I also know that John Casey has made songs with this exact appeal before, and he made it way better than what we have. There's also the fact that this was not only one day from Monstercat's 13th anniversary, it was also one day away from being my birthday release. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Mod's Balloon, but I'll take that over this. Number 8. I've always said that disappointing songs will end up higher than just plain bad songs. And sometimes that can link back to Burnham songs. For most of these artists, they've either had no good tracks, so the fact that the song was bad isn't too big of a surprise, or they're artists that peaked years ago and have slowly been crashing down, and losing what made them so interesting in the first place. So I consider Nope by Cyclops to be worse than something like Feral by Riot 10. One has expectations, the other doesn't have any. So you can imagine my excitement seeing these two names collaborate together again, thinking that it would be good, or at the very least decent, only for it to turn to dispiritedness the moment I actually heard it. Oh dear, what happened here? I know Must Die can sometimes create some messy tracks now and then, but his ability to create some hard-hitting material is still there. Look at Back to the Rave with Keizo. And G-Kui is one of the better rhythm acts to sign, since his jumpier flow works well within the genre. He made a good track with Bear Grylls of all people, and he's also got a gnarly song with one-off artist Effin called Rabbit. These two collaborating, it should make for a good track. And while the house sections, along with Jilly's vocal performance, are good, also not surprising from G-Kui since he's said on the I'm Picky podcast that he wants to make more house material, it's the drops, those screechy, unappealing drops. The first one is slightly better because there is a touch of Must Die's grittier sound design, but the second drop just drives me up that wall with that flute lead. But my larger issue is that the drops do not fit with the rest of the song. The song sets itself as a brighter house track, or at least something equivalent, and then it randomly turned into a darker freeform bass track for no other reason, which, to give it some leeway, that might be the point, but it doesn't make this any less of a disappointing track, and a song that feels like a bunch of ideas thrown together. The risk was not worth it. Number 7. But say what you want about Risk and All, at least it's creative. Sure, it falls flat in the end, but both Must Die and Jaqui are trying with their experimentation, which is emblematic of both of their musical careers. It just so happens that Risk and All ended up a dud. Whereas here, I mean, come on, what on earth are we even doing here? You're gonna have to follow me on this one. The original Free was a song from the K-pop Demon Hunter soundtrack. I haven't watched the movie, but from what I've heard, people consider it the weaker song of that movie. The original remix of the song was by Lockbox, who made a drum and bass remix after his wife requested it after they watched the movie, where he sped up the vocals and added some drum and bass percussion. That version is still on YouTube, by the way. Then Arm & Hammer showed up, replaced EJ with Sarah Benyo and Andrew Choi with Gabriel Eli, slowed down the tempo to 160 BPM, added in a melodic bass drop, and Lockbox wanted to do this version because he wanted to collaborate with Arm & Hammer. But even with all that, this song still fails. For one, the vocals sound incredibly out of place. Sarah Benyo's verses sound awful, as her vocal cadence sounds considerably worse than EJ's original. Gabriel Ile is at least a little better on his verse. It sounds like he's trying to mimic the tonal cadence of the original. That is until he starts singing in his bad lower register, and it sounds just as off as Sarah Benyo's does. It sounds like a bad karaoke version of the original song. And that's before I talk about the production. I wasn't a fan of the original remix's drum and bass production. It sounded a bit underwhelming, and the slowed down tempo managed to make it sound worse, but the worst part by far is Arm & Hammer's melodic drop, which sounds so muddy and poorly mixed that it made me feel bad for putting If I Lost You on my list last year. Congrats to Lockbox, I guess, for making his dream come true. It's just a shame that it came at the cost of making a bad cover of a song that should have stayed as an original remix form. You can skip this. Number 6. It's all Bridum and freeform bass from here, just warning you. You know it's a bad year when, even despite Rule 3, most of this list is still Bridum or freeform bass. But at the same time, it's called the worst Monstercat songs of 2025 for a reason. And many of the Bridum acts released some really bad material. And as for here, I mean, I'm just glad that this was the only song he got on the label, because it could have been much worse. By the time October hit, I was actually feeling more optimistic. It seemed like the single releases were getting interesting, from Bishu to Higo to the Undertale remixes, and even remixes from Stealing Fire. Everything seemed to be heading towards a month where there were plenty of good songs, and the worst might be bad, but at least it would just be standard bad, nothing too crazy. Then the unicorn-obsessed edgelord showed up, along with Level Up, who Monstercat keeps trying to promote, even if I haven't been impressed with her material so far. To put this into perspective, we're dealing with a guy whose whole persona is making shock value for no other reason other than to be edgy. And while sometimes it can be funny, look at Abacadabra, for the most part, it was just there to get a reaction from you, and after a while, it starts to get really annoying. As for this, well, at least he's not doing that. I honestly doubt Monstercat would allow him to do that. What Palm of Your Hand instead reveals is the real reason why I don't like Borgore. His modern style is Wales if you put all of the screechy elements to the very front and push back the low end elements. He's the very definition of loud and abrasive for the sake of it. Despite the simple flow and structure of the song, with that rhythm melody and grimy sound design, he puts all the high pitched elements to the front. Level Up sections are at least more bland than outright bad, but by the time the second half of the drops comes in, the Borgore influence really kicks in. The synth elements get worse, as does the snare, as well as featuring an ugly electronic sputtering sustain that makes the song worse to listen to. At least Eloise Kebbel has a decent vocal performance, And out of the Bogor tracks, this isn't bad as something like Paranoia 303 or the vast majority of the tracks from Art of Gore. Don't look it up, but it's still bad. We don't need more Bogor on Monstercat. Number 5. These next few songs, I'll just say who the artist is, because there were a lot of contenders that these three in question could have had if it was for Rule 3. To start off, we have a song from DJ Diesel. And look, if Shaq wants to make festival Brittum stuff that causes him to make him feel something that he was missing when he was retired, all the more power to him. And he's got up enough of a personality to make tracks like Bang Your Head, Mosh Pit, and Damage work. Because of this, I don't really have it in me to dislike him as an artist, but man did he try this year, with MDE somehow being worse than Guerrilla Warfare, and willing to work with anyone, even if it means getting producers like Benda and Perry Wayne, who have been terrible across the board. But as I've said already on this list, a disappointing song is worse than just a plain bad one. And while people point to Fade Away or Throwing Bows as the worst in terms of production quality, for me, it's hard to get super negative at these songs when we have much bigger problems. Can someone remind me when Ivory used to be good, and when Samplifier was in his Viking rhythm era instead of his trench style? Because you might not like Infect, but at least his style is more creative and ambitious, often with better sounds. He can make a few songs like Goop or Zoom with his style, and he puts more variety into his bass lines and melodies to keep things interesting. Samplifier and Ivory, on the other hand, seem to combine Brittum and Trench to bring the worst aspects of both. The repetitive nature of Brittum with the underwhelming sound design that Trench can come up with. And with Animal, that's exactly what you get. The song is as sluggish as, well, whenever Shaq tries to run the movie Steel, with Samplifier's unappealing goopy sound design that I didn't like in Goom, Ivory's incredibly underwhelming rhythm design with no punch that he usually has, and the first drop has the potential with that lead but doesn't utilize it properly, instead adding drops that feel more like filler. And what's worst of all is how depressing this sounds. You'd think, given the goofy nature of the lyrics, you'd expect something with a little bit more bright, maybe in a major key, or something to match the tone like with Pay Respect or Damage. Not this gloomy aesthetic where not even Shaq himself seems to be having fun with this. In other words, given the Transformers reference, if this were any of the Transformers films, it would be Age of Extinction. It's pointlessly long, it goes on forever, and it's really boring. I get that in terms of listenability, there's worse on the EP, but this feels especially disappointing coming from these two, given Samplifier has Berserker, and Ivory has Bad For You and Madeira. Really underwhelming. Number 4. This next artist shouldn't be a big surprise, as he's been a repeat offender for this list ever since 2022. Sullivan King. I find it funny how a day before his EP release, I released my best list for 2024, and it said I wanted more songs like The Beginning on his project. Sad to say we didn't get that. In fact, for these 2 new singles, we got more songs like Slaughter, and while Fury with Amorphic had a shot for sounding like a wall of ugly distortion that Sullivan King keeps adding, and as a result makes his songs sound so much worse than it needs to be, I've always said that Sullivan King makes better material when he switches it up, making something outside of his Burnham stuff. And you can argue this song does that, but does it in a way that feels more like a rug pull than a legitimate attempt. And as a result, you get songs like this. I'm at the point with Sullivan King where finding something new to say about his worst material becomes a challenge. The rock parts toward the beginning are solid, and the electric guitar creates a great build-up, only for yet another run-of-the-mill Sullivan King Brittum drop to show up. And while it's not as messy and distorted as most of his tracks off the EP, it's still a repetitive track, even more so than usual, with the metallic synth stabs not sticking out the way they should, and the snare clug sounds really off-putting. And then something shifts for the second drop. See, I like it when Sullivan King shifts to other genres like they did with Thorns of Blood, Came to Rage, or The Beginning, so I thought the second drop would save the song when I heard a great techno section, probably one of the few times where a techno drop is earned, then changes it again to hardstyle for 16 bars, not as good, but it's still different, and I can see this going hard on a live show, and then it transitions again to the same Brittum drop. So to recap, we have a decent techno section for 8 bars, a hardstyle section for 16 bars, and it turns out all of it was for a fake out for the same rhythm drops we've been hearing from Sullivan King for years. I'm sorry, it feels like the song pulled one over on the listener. It's yet another generic Sullivan King festival heavy track, the worst kind of Sullivan King song, and the moment it attempts to do something, it ends up completely used for a fake out. As the old saying goes, creating chaos only causes more chaos. Number 3. Now on the opposite side, you get an artist that to my shock and amazement has not made one of these lists yet. Company. He had a bad 2024, where despite Brainbuster, Tax Evasion, and Never Come Back being contenders, they got snubbed for my worst list, which I'm now thinking is a mistake. His sound design started getting more hollow and less impactful, or started collaborating with artists like Cyclops and meshing his style in the worst way possible. And he somehow had an even worse year in 2025, where like with Samplifier and Ivory, he decided to combine Brittum and Trench together into the most unappealing fusion possible that fits the strengths of neither. While his sound design is even getting more hollowed out, having none of the impact that made songs like Rapture, Blade, or Purge, and even a few years ago with Cold Blooded, Strapped, and even Next Snap with Boss Fight. I'm just glad the collaboration with Jason Ross was off-label because it would have been sad to see him on this list, but one of his collaborations was on the label, and since he's not the only one getting flack here, safe to say, this has been a long time coming. If you want a melodic bass act who has aged the poorest and time quickly caught up to, Adventure Club is certainly one of them. Ever since Love and Chaos, it became clear that they depended heavily on acts with distinctive personalities like Set the Sky and Nurko, because their style of melodic bass has been done to death, and they weren't seeing any signs of evolving. So naturally the solution would be to turn to the Brittum genre, right? Wrong. The genre might be different, but it's the same generic feeling that was still in their songs. Which leads us to Set Me Free. Sarah Benu has said that the context of this song was very personal to her. That was about breaking free and finding your own truth in spite of religious and cultural conditioning. Too bad the song never explores that outside of a surface level, causing the song that only has one verse that's only 4 bars long, which is not enough bars to convey that feeling. And that's before I talk about the production. With the first drop being a beyond basic Brittum drop with trap elements, it sounds like Trash Talk without the punch or low-end energy. And the second drop is a house switch up that not only fits with nothing, not only sounds repetitive and weak, but it also completely removes any sort of emotional connection the song might have had. It's worse than putting a random heavy drop on a melodic song. It sounds like 2 songs were stitched together no matter how much they just don't fit. The concept of the lyrical content is good, there's a lot to work with. I just wish it was given to someone who could actually elevate it. Not this. Number 2. Monstercat has been known throughout the years to follow trends within the music scene. It's why there are a few pop-punk songs in 2022, too many house songs in 2023, and it's why freeform bass has been slowly becoming a thing as well. Because after Christopher Fire and Fred Again took off, this inspired more traction towards that specific genre. So if Monstercat really wanted to introduce new people to the sound, they may want to grab someone who's familiar and recognizable within the scene, especially when Monstercat is now into the mainstream with Create Music Group. Some of the acts that come to mind are Liney, Tape B, Moody Good, Peekaboo, and oh no, what have you guys done? Let me put a hold on the obvious problem for now. The song has the potential to work. Between the flow of the bass line, the crispy percussion tap, and the sharper, fizzier hi-hat, the production is pretty good. John Casey has made plenty of good tracks with minimal elements like Don't You and Give Me, and Peekaboo is a pioneer of this sound, and is one of the best acts to do it with. And it shows in this minimalistic production. Give this to someone like Floden or Screwfizzer, this could go hard. So now we get to the obvious problem. The vocal sample on this song is horrid. The whiny vocal delivery drives me through the roof, it's constantly repetitive, and worst of all, you never get a break from it. And if you thought that wasn't bad enough, that's before you translate the lyrics. In fact, I'm just gonna read some of these lines to you. I scrape my A word on the floor as I slowly climb up. Start with a hard D because I know you're C. Big D, O to F my big D. Your C, O to F my big D, dog, 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 to F my big D. Seriously, it sounds like a bad Portuguese porno video. It's not even the word go, it's xeraco, which is translation for big penis. And that's what I realized. This is just bounced at by Riot 10 all over again, just without any ironic humor, because despite Trick Barbie's bad vocal performance, at least the delivery could be funny. Whereas all this makes me want to do is listen to anything else because of how annoying this is. John Casey and Peekaboo have absolutely made better material, and it's painful to see such production get completely wasted on one of the most irritating songs I've heard this year. You can go all you like, just know if you make a mess, I'm not cleaning it up. Number 1. We all know who it is, and if you kept up with the discourse and what I've been saying, you know what song it is. There's no other choice here. Throughout 2025, I was attempting to give Riot 10 the benefit of the doubt, even despite all the bad songs released last year, and to be fair, Requiem for a Riot is more bland bad than outright atrocious. It's still pretty bad, and the only songs that were decent were All Black Tint and High Octane, but nothing that was truly atrocious, except for this song. By far the worst off of that album on production alone, and a massive concern that this got released in the state that it was in. The repetitive synth staff, the step clap are all you get for drops here, and they have all this horrible muddy blending to them that makes it sound like it comes from a hollow, drippy sewer pipe. And as one of the most ear-piercing yoisons I've ever heard, the first time I heard that I jolted back, and the ending is so abrupt I generally had to do a double take to see if that was actually the end of the track. And even despite all of that, all the production issues, that's not even the worst part about this track. If what I just described to you wasn't bad enough, that's before I tell you there are multiple millisecond pauses on the drops themselves, which create this jerky feeling whenever the song has to constantly stop itself, halting whatever flow it has. Once you hear it, you'll never stop hearing it. And it doesn't sound like a stylistic choice. It sounds like Riot 10 forgot to close the gaps of his own song file before submitting it to the label, and for the label to approve of it, it's shocking on a whole nother level. Without question, the worst Monstercat song of 2025, and Riot 10's worst track on the label. I don't want to head into 2026 fearing yet another unfinished track is waiting in the wings. If Riot 10 is going to stick around, fine, but at least don't make any more of this, because it's terrible. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see here, please like and subscribe, really appreciate it. I have my best list coming in a few days, so stay tuned for that. But until then, I will see you all soon.